Once again, the Right Honourable John Healey MP, the Secretary of State for Defence. Also appearing for the first time is the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Defence, Mr Jeremy Pocklington. And it is a pleasure to welcome you once again, General Dame Sharon Naismith, who is Vice Chief of the Defence Staff. Secretary of State, I know at the outset you wanted to pay tribute to Lance Corporal George Healey, who sadly died in Ukraine last month, and I would also like, on behalf of our Defence Committee, to put on the record recognition for his service. So obviously we've all read the final letter published at the request of his friends and family, and we were all deeply moved. So if you will, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that welcome to all three of us. You rightly describe this committee as a critical friend, partisan about defence, but properly demanding of us in government. So can I place on record my and our appreciation for the work that you, your members and your staff do, for the constructive challenge that you offer to the work that we do in the Defence Department. Chair, I would like to mark this occasion before the committee just with a short tribute to Lance Corporal George Healey. As you say, he lost his life in Ukraine last month in the cause of peace and freedom. He served our nation with distinction and with honour. And in the words of one of his comrades who I spoke to and was with this month, he described him as the best bloke I've ever worked with. And when I met with President Zelensky a couple of weeks ago in Kyiv, I said I hoped that he would see the tragic loss of Corporal Healey as confirmation that we in Britain are ready to send our best to support his nation, that Britain continues to be Ukraine's closest, most reliable ally, and that we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. And a secure Europe requires a strong Ukraine. And as Defence Secretary, I can confirm for this committee that our mission continues. Support the fight today, secure the peace tomorrow.
Thank you very much for that. And now I just want to kick off the questions, if I may, on the changing strategic context. Obviously, there's been a lot going on within the last few weeks, and whether that's with regards to the ongoing illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the Defence Committee was recently in Ukraine to see for ourselves what is happening on the ground. We've also seen for the first time a NATO ally threatening to annex NATO territory with regards to Greenland. I know that we've debated that within the chamber as well, not to mention the publication of the new US National Security Strategy and the Defence National Strategy as well. So with respect to all of that, and we all acknowledge that the US is our number one ally, but the sands, they are shifting. So for us, we were also very perturbed by the awful, hurtful comments with regards to our brave servicemen and women, 457 of whom perished, and we never thought a US president would be using such words. So with regards to all of that's going on, how do you think that's affected your own agenda with regards to the modernisation and transformation of our armed forces?
I think it has reinforced the case that we have made as a government since July 2024. I think it has reinforced the vision and imperative of transformation that was set out in last year's Strategic Defence Review. And in the context that we see and that you outline there, Mr Chairman, we've certainly seen over recent months demands on defence rising, uncertainties increasing, and that doubles down, I think, on the way that as a government we have tried to approach this new era of threat and uncertainty, which is to fashion a new era for defence, but that's within the context of a government that recognises this is an era that requires hard power with greater investment in defence, stronger alliances, resetting our relations with key European allies, and shore diplomacy, which I think we've seen from the Prime Minister very clearly over the last fortnight in the midst of the concerns over Greenland, the new publications of the National Defence Strategy and previously the National Security Strategy in the US, and of course the increasing commitments that we are ready to make in support of Ukraine.
Will you be investing more in our own sovereign capabilities? Because a lot of us are concerned that we seem to be beholden to other allies and we do not have sufficient sovereign capability. And that, I think, was also part of the government's agenda to bolster the defence industrial base. You've often intimated that defence is an engine for growth. So what are you doing to ensure that we have more sovereign capability?
Will we be investing in more UK sovereign capability? Yes. An argument I've made for several years before the election. We declared at the election when we were elected into government that we would look to direct British defence investment first towards British-based firms, new jobs and innovation in this country. That's exactly what we have been doing, and over the last year you've seen over 1,100 major contracts let, 84% of that going to British-based firms, and in the last year you've seen a rise in the direct defence investment into British firms by over 6% above inflation.
And with regards to the Prime Minister, I know that he and the Chancellor will be visiting China. Now, can you confirm whether the Prime Minister is willing to sacrifice defence and security concerns at the altar of economic prosperity with the second largest economy in the world?
No, this is a Prime Minister that refuses to be drawn on what he sees as false binary choices, US or Europe, China trade or China concerns about security. In this complex world, particularly with a complex country like China, there are both enormous important trading opportunities with China, but there are also security concerns that are deep-rooted and continuing, and he will and we will balance both.
I know Ian Roon wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, just on that capability, Secretary of State, the Armed Forces is suffering as the government retired the Puma in March 2025, leaving a medium-lift helicopter capability gap. So what is happening with awarding the medium-sized helicopter contract? As you say, there are thousands of British jobs and within the SME supply chain that are relying on this decision, and industry need the certainty now.
I understand that, Mr. Room. First of all, on the Puma, that was a decision I took last year. We are in a process. It is a big challenge for a new government to deal with what was a defence equipment programme that was heavily overcommitted, badly underfunded, and in many areas unsuited to the changing threats that we face. So as we make our defence investment decisions now to implement the vision of the Strategic Defence Review, there will be tough decisions that we need to make. And the Puma decision, like Watchkeeper, like HMS Bulwark and Albion, were all decisions that were long overdue, in my view, necessary decisions to help set up and reprioritise the defence budget for the future. On the new medium helicopter contract, that competitive process is still underway. We're considering that in the context of the wider investment plans and priorities that we are balancing at the moment. But I am acutely conscious.
As I understood it, there was only one successful candidate left in the contract.
You will understand that there is a contract process underway, and that's not been completed yet. And I am deeply aware of just how important the skills of the workforce are, and the potential that they have to play a part in part of the sort of transformation that we need to see in the technology we develop, the manufacturing we produce and the kit that we get much quicker into the hands of our warfighters for the future. And as you'd expect, both the Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry, Luke Pollard, and I are talking regularly and closely with the most senior Leonardo managers and directors. And I was with and discussing this with the Leonardo UK MD just last week.
And Secretary, talking of contracts, where are we with Ajax? Billions of pounds of public money invested, absolute shambles. Who's to blame, and what are you doing to resolve the situation?
So Luke Pollard, Minister for DRI, updated the House quite properly last week. I am furious that vital information was withheld.
Ministers were lied to.
It's clear we didn't have the full facts in the lead up to decisions about the initial operating capability. That IOC has been withdrawn. The Army is no longer in charge of this programme. A new Senior Responsible Officer, SRO, is now in place. I've been clear that we must back it or scrap it. The work is being done at the moment in order to put us in a position to make that decision. And whilst I really want to see the way that we procure for the future being more innovative, more rapid, first and foremost will be my concern for the safety and protection of our forces personnel.
Okay. Thomas.
Thank you. Secretary of State, in your answer to the Chair's first question, you mentioned several times the desire to invest in British-based companies and manufacturers in defence. In opposition, we spoke about Buy British. You spoke about Buy British, and that was the kind of Labour manifesto spoke about that as well. You're now using language that is British-based. Does that reflect a policy within the department to accept that it's too difficult sometimes to give contracts directly to British companies, and that there's an acceptance that if a foreign company from, let's say, Europe or America has a British subsidiary, we're now accepting that being British-based is sort of good enough to fall in with that kind of Buy British mentality?
3 points. First of all, Buy British is clearly a shorthand. What it signifies is a determination and a first focus on the role that defence can play as an engine for growth, creating new jobs, new opportunities, skills, backing good British-based businesses and innovators for the future. Second, it is not always possible to buy entirely British. There are certain capabilities that we need that are best produced by other countries or produced in combination and collaboration with industries in other countries, allied countries. And third, I think I would just encourage the committee and the public over the next 2 to 3 years to judge us on what we do, not just on what we say. I've given the committee already the figures in the first year in government for the way that we've increased defence investment into British firms. I've made a series of announcements that will lead to more British jobs and opportunities. In Ms Scrogham's constituency here, just since the last election, there are over 1,000 extra jobs in the Barrow shipyard because of the extra investment that we're putting into defence. And I'm announcing today a new programme to find the next UK defence tech unicorn in this country. That's a pot of up to £20 million that we will go after and invite those entrepreneurs that may not have done much or any business within defence before to come forward with the sort of innovation and ideas that they may have that we can help develop and support. And this is part of the Office for Small Business Growth opening its doors today. And it's, if you like, new ways of finding new entrants and new entrepreneurs in Britain for a programme that we're set to spend £2.5 billion in directly in supporting small SMEs in the next each year. So this is Britain as our first focus. Our sovereign capability, as you put it, Mr. Thomas, as a priority. And fundamentally, it's also a recognition of what we can draw from Ukraine, which is that when a country is under threat or forced to fight, its armed forces are only as strong as the industry and the innovators and the investors that stand behind them in their own country and with their close allies. And in this period where we face increasing threats, we face rising demands on defence, then there is a strong economic case for directing our investment to British-based firms. Okay. There is a strong security case for doing the same thing.
Okay, thank you. I'll just move on to ask you about the much delayed defence investment plan, and you said just now to judge us on what we do. You also alluded to the requirement, come any potential wartime scenario, to have a strong manufacturing base behind you that you can't just magic up. This defence investment plan, obviously it's been widely reported on, the kind of unconfirmed meetings that may or may not have happened in number 10. I think the kind of what we've heard from people within your department on record in this committee room is that it's a question of prioritisation. Can you give us a sense of, taken as read, that basically the SDR is a range of options and that there's not all the money in the world to do everything within it? What is your priority within the SDR to get funded within the investment plan?
So the SDR is a vision with a set of 62 recommendations, all of which we've accepted. It's a vision for transforming defence over a decade, and centre to it is the imperative to raise the levels of warfighting readiness in this country in order better to deter the increasing threats we face, and to work more closely with the allies that we may, in the end, need to fight with.
And in terms of prioritisation, is it more important for you, do you think, to make sure that Britain is ready to fight and win in a potential combat scenario in Eastern Europe next year or in the next 12 months? Or is the priority kind of further down the line into the 2030s?
Running throughout the whole of the vision and the programme for the next decade will be raising levels of warfighting readiness alongside, as the SDR laid out, making defence an engine for growth in this country. And those are exactly the fine judgments that we're making at the moment as part of this investment planning process. One that isn't simply about producing a new defence equipment programme and plan, which this committee and your predecessors have been so critical of under previous governments. This is the first line-by-line defence planning, almost a zero-based review, if you like, the department has carried out for 18 years. But it is also one that will not just deal with the capabilities, it will deal with the infrastructure, it will deal with our people. I'm just
trying to get a sense of, when you've got these teams and the quad working for you and trying to get this dip ready and something happened and it got delayed, your staff, so NAD and CDS, on record here, said it was a question of prioritisations and that they weren't able to give that prioritisation, they worked to it. Are you able to give us any sense of what the priority is, aside from the very big ticket items of saying readiness as a concept and growth, an engine for growth as a concept, which no one across any political spectrum, well, maybe not quite, but most people wouldn't disagree with? Are you
Mr. Thomas, those were not the two lodestars that you saw driving defence decisions under the last government. Was set out. We set this out in the manifesto that you and I were elected on. We set this out as a new government, and when we've captured it in this first of its kind ever strategic defence review published last year, and it is that strategic defence review which sets out both the vision and the priorities for transformation that you will see reflected in the defence investment planning, because this is the way that we put the SDR into practice over the next decade.
Are you able to give any sense more of drive that you give people within the department to work towards, other than very big ticket strategy items like readiness as a kind of big concept and engine for growth as a big concept? For example, do you say to them, I want to be absolutely ready should we have to deploy people in 6 months' time? I want to know that they've got the most advanced, up-to-date, contemporary technologies to fight with. And that's the most important thing to me. And then we can worry about very large platform procurement that will have effect in 20 years' time after that. Or is it the other way around? And you say, we need to make sure that we're ready for 10, 15 years' time, and we can take a bit of risk in the next year.
With respect, those are quite narrow questions. You asked me for priorities. I'm saying to you those are set out quite clearly in the Strategic Defence Review, including in the 62 recommendations we've accepted. You asked me whether I can evidence any of the priorities. I can do that with the actions and decisions we've already taken.
I don't think 62 recommendations, you can't have 62 priorities.
Well, hang on. In the last 3 months, we have confirmed a decade-long $9 billion injection and a new defence housing strategy. We did the first stage of the legislation for a new housing service yesterday in the House. That was a major priority that goes beyond the sort of capabilities that have always been looked at in the past. But in my view, and the SDR's vision, is fundamental to raising morale, helping deal with the recruitment and retention crisis we inherited from 14 years of failure on all those fronts, but fundamentally also helping equip our forces to be more flexible, more settled, more able to fight better in the future. I could point you to the military intelligence service and the counterintelligence unit that we've set up and recently launched. I could point you also to the electromagnetic and cyber warfare command that has been established. All recommendations in the SDR regarded as important enough to act now. So if you want an indication of the sort of priorities, I refer you, I'm afraid, back to that SDR, the recommendations and the imperatives that run throughout that, because that's what we will follow.
It's good,
and the
to hear about those
plan will be the implementation of that SDR.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to hear about those particular priorities with the SDR, but it's said that the Prime Minister was livid when he found out that the Strategic Defence Review wasn't fully costed, and that's why the Times has reported that there's apparently a £28 billion shortfall. Do you agree with that assessment? Can you corroborate that? And what cuts are you planning in capabilities in order to meet the rest of the prioritisations within the Strategic Defence Review?
I would just say to you, Mr. Chairman, and you've been around long enough to know not to take at face value what you read in the press.
Those were false.
The SDR, when it was completed and published, was fully affordable within the financial commitments that we made. That was confirmed, including by the Prime Minister when he published it. You will know that there is $6 billion extra in the defence budget this year compared to last year. You will know, this committee above all, that we will be spending, as things are, $270 billion in this Parliament alone. And so the challenge for us, like any organisation, is to make sure that we are directing that investment to the things that matter most. We're doing it in a way that allows us to control and manage our budgets for the future, because that's exactly what the taxpayer would expect of us.
Yeah, right. Jesse Norman.
Thank you very much indeed. Just a quick question. You've said, Secretary of State, that you absolutely recognise the importance of this committee as a critical friend of the MOD, and I think you also recognise that we treat all information we've been given in confidence. There have been no leaks of any kind that I'm aware of, certainly from this committee. But the amount of information we've had from MOD over the years has gone down rather than up. So in the context of assisting us in our work, would you be willing to let us have the annual budget cycle documents that MOD produces so that we can scrutinise some of the work that you're doing and have a better sense of the priorities that you have come to?
Well, look, this committee will receive the information it's traditionally had on budgeting, annual reports and accounts, and you'll be able to take me to task, the new Permanent Secretary to task, on the areas that you want to cross-examine.
Can I just add, for just To aid the committee, because I know a previous Secretary of State raised this in the hearing, I think, last week. As part of defence reform, we're actually changing our approach to how we manage the budget in MOD, and the annual budget cycle to which you're referring was under the sort of the previous regime based on the annual update to deliver the defence plan. We are moving our approach to a strategic planning cycle that actually brings together the strategy and the finances in a single cycle. And this will help us improve our alignment of resources and priorities. It's a significant change. It'll be moving away, and perhaps there'll be less focus on those sort of isolated budgeting rounds to the integrated multi-year approach. That's why the Defence Investment Plan is going to be at the heart of that. But just to help the committee, it's worth noting we're shifting our approach to align with defence reform.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and we'll be able to judge it when we've got the details. Will you commit to briefing the committee staff so that we're completely on top of the technicalities of that, but also letting us have a baseline so that we can then judge what progress you make against your strategic priorities under that new schema?
We'll set out the information in the Defence Investment Plan. I'm very happy to brief the committee on how we've constructed our approach, but we will of course be will of course provide information that the committee need as MOD does in the past and as Parliament requires.
Yeah, but you said you can't do it as the past because you've changed the system. So I'm asking, can we then have a benchmark so that we know what basis you're starting from with this new system that you've developed?
Well, look, first of all, we will set a new benchmark that will be shared with the committee. But I think, to be fair to us, Mr. Chairman, when the committee has asked for briefings in private and with a degree of confidentiality, we've always tried to respond, and you have been public and positive about the way that we have been able to do that to this committee in a way that there were complaints about that the previous committee didn't get that information. And so if it is a briefing that you're looking for, Mr. Norman, and as a committee, on the way that we are trying to change the what the Permanent Secretary describes as the strategic decision-taking cycle, then of course we will do that.
Briefings would be great. The trouble is that we won't get institutional memory and accountability if we don't have documents showing what the basis was when you started and how you're going to work out the numbers. And then in a year's time or 2 years' time, we can look back and say, well, that was the baseline, this is how it changed, and that was what the system was. So we do need some documentary basis for what you're deciding as you go. We can have it in retrospect, but we must have some kind of grip as a committee as to what's actually going on.
Of course.
I think that's,
well, you're a one-man institutional memory for this committee, if I may say so, Mr.
I wish that was true, and certainly unreliable if so.
yeah. Michelle Scroggle.
Thank you. If we can just go back to the Defence Investment Plan. Obviously, it's wildly awaited with speculation on why we're waiting so long to see it, but that aside, my concern is businesses. So we've got a fairly large supply chain. Many of those businesses rely on the orders coming through. They don't survive on hints and ideas on what might come through. Talking to businesses recently, there are businesses out there that are shedding staff. Now, that is the opposite of what we were looking for at the moment, but they're doing that because they don't know what signals are going to turn into actual orders. So can you tell me what we're doing to protect those businesses while they're waiting for this information to feed through, whether it's next week, next month, spring, with it, they need that information. So what are we doing to make sure that they have the support they need now?
So I understand those concerns that businesses sometimes voice. I would just say that this is in the context of a greater certainty that this sector has not had. There is no one working in the defence industry today who has known they were working in the certain decade of rising defence spending ahead. No one working within defence industry that has the certainty of the vision within which our priorities and our decisions will be taken with the Strategic Defence Review. And I would just say confirmation of important decisions will be part of the Defence Investment Plan. But that is not stopping us getting on with a good deal of the contracts needed, the action that's required. And I said to the committee earlier on that over the last year or so, we have let over 1,100 major contracts. And just last week, I was in Edinburgh with Leonardo, announcing a £450 million contract to upgrade our Typhoon jets. That is investment decisions now, straight into the manufacturing of the new radars. And that isn't just about our own, making our own Typhoon fleet more lethal, better able to outmaneuver and have the edge on adversaries. That's about reinforcing the ability for us to make British-made Typhoons attractive to other countries as well. And as a proof of that, I would just say to you, look at the £8 billion deal we agreed with Turkey for Typhoons in the autumn last year. It was part of more than £20 billion of a boost to British defence industries that we won in exports in the last year alone. That's a record level since records began nearly 40 years ago.
Thank you very much. Calvin Bailey.
Thanks very much. Sorry, I'm going to take you back a few steps. So you arrived in government, the equipment plan is there waiting for you with what the MOD put as between 7 and 29 billion out of whack. The NAO reckons it's about 16 to 17 billion out of phase. Why wasn't that formally resolved or recognised prior to the SDR process commencing?
Sorry, you're talking about the equipment plan produced under the last government?
2020.
Why on earth would we continue with something that was badly flawed as that? It wasn't just that the NAO regarded it as underfunded and unlikely to be delivered. It also pointed out that the whole way that Defence previously was putting that together wasn't even consistent between the three services. Now, we were new government, set of new strategic priorities for the UK, a strategic shift, if you like, just like the US is undergoing some sort of strategic shift. With the UK, it was a recognition that we had to make our overriding defence strategy, a NATO-first strategy, that we had to do alongside other European allies more lifting, heavy lifting within NATO, that we had to step up our support for Ukraine, and that we had to build a new deal for European security within NATO. And that's what we've been doing. Now, frankly, even when you come to the equipment plan, before you come to the detail that I've touched on before about it being overcommitted and underfunded, it was unsuited to the threats we face. It wasn't suited to the sort of transformation required or the rapidly accelerating technological change that you, Mr. Bailey, are really well on top of and an expert on. We have to do things differently.
That I recognise. My question was, why wasn't this up front? So some of us sat on the Public Accounts Committee to try and get after the detail of this discussion of that business, and we didn't have a baselining in the way that Mr. Norman put out. That would have been a really useful thing, because it would have been quite clear the programmes or the elements of the programme which just weren't funded and were pie in the sky in the first instance. And so arriving in the SDR process, there is an effort to not compound that error, even though we didn't have the necessary public discussion to understand just how bad things were anyway. But in attempting to not compound the error, the TORs for the SDR said that the review will identify where reprioritisation of roles, capabilities, activities and support will be made in the current defence programme. That's correct, am I not?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, because last week CDS was unclear that was the case, and just to kind of link, and I know we'll talk about the ABC later, that is entirely contrary to how your new design works. It's very definitely that CDS should be providing some of that prioritisation internally to you. So the question I have is, who took the decision to remove the reprioritisation from the SDR? When was that decision made, and under what rationale?
Sorry, I'm actually, you've lost me.
Okay.
The SDR was a reset of this country's strategic defence and security approach. It was done so to reflect the the framework of priorities that we'd set out in our manifesto.
With the greatest respect to Secretary of State, my point was that in the TORs, the reprioritisation was part of the activity. And at some point, and we observed this into our two committee, and I can draw out the quotes, when the team first came out in front of us, I think it was Lord Robertson first said, like, that's part of what we are being asked to do. And then when they came back, General Barron said, actually, I don't have to worry about this. Like, that's for them to do. When between those two meetings was that changed? Under what rationale did that change come about?
I may be a bit slow, but I'm still not following you. Of course, the Strategic Defence Review was a review and a resetting of Britain's strategic priorities. We left behind, and we said at the election we would, the sort of bombast of a global Britain under Boris Johnson. We were recognising the increasing threats. We were recognising that America was rightly requiring European nations to step up and do more within NATO. And we were recognising that a Britain that burnt its relations, sometimes willfully so in the Brexit process, had left Britain without the strength of alliances that we need for the future, which is why since the election you've seen the Trinity House Agreement with Germany that wasn't there before, you've seen a reboot of the Lancaster House Agreement with France, you've seen the Luna House Agreement with Norway, all with strategic security and defence relations at their heart, but also big economic opportunities
and with,
as well.
With the greatest respect, all of those things are wonderful, but they are built on the foundations of a £7 to £29 billion 10-year plan. So it was already running into the programme. So a year in, you've already been working in the annual budget cycles, which would have been prefaced on that flawed plan. The SDR then arrives and it adds all this new ambition, and we don't know at which point the SDR team was told not to apply that ambition within the SDR. We don't know why, and there is no evidence of reprioritisation after the SDR. So the question again, at which point was the prioritisation removed from the SDR team?
I'm still failing to understand your question, and Chair, perhaps I could just say, if you need to, can you write to me on this?
My friend Emily will be able to advise on that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Healey, I'm just not following what you're saying.
All right,
the SDR team.
Emma, yeah, go on.
Sorry, afternoon all. Secretary of State, I think if I can try and simplify it, because I do tend to speak quite bluntly and straight, the SDR was supposed to identify reprioritisation, but it didn't. The reviewers were clear with us that that had been removed. So why did the SDR should go from its terms of reference to say it should identify what defence should and should no longer do to then changing? Is what we're trying to understand here. Is that fair, Calvin?
There are no down arrows. The SDR doesn't say what it isn't going to do.
So
and then more worryingly, you also have programmes in there that you knew were unfunded, but your language, they're heavily overcommitted and badly underfunded decisions. And there is no evidence that they've been removed. So we've tried to ask in the question prior to me, like, what were those things? But what's most important is, where was the decision made to not do that, and where?
The Strategic Defence Review was always a strategic review. It wasn't there to make the detailed investment decisions. That's my job, that's our job, that's the job we're now doing to implement the Strategic Defence Review through the Defence Investment planning process. What it did do was recognise that there were priorities that the previous government might have pursued, reflected in the defence programme and the programme of record. For instance, a global Britain role. For instance, a kit that just wasn't recognising the very rapid technological change. And it's one of the reasons that I made those decisions I referred to earlier, while the SDR review was going on things like Watchkeeper, on Bulwark, on Albion, on Puma. Because we do and we have to make disinvestment decisions as well as investment decisions. But those are for us, not for the strategic reviewers.
what you're saying doesn't fit with the terms of reference from the SDR. I'm looking at them now, and what you're saying doesn't align with the actual terms of reference. And what myself and Calvin are trying to understand is what changed from the terms of reference to the SDR being produced.
The work of the SDR, and it worked within the terms of reference, it worked within the financial envelope it was given, it produced the Strategic Defence Review. You can take a view about whether it fully met its terms of reference or not. It was a fundamental review. It was the first of its kind done in that way. It had an extraordinary input of challenge and review from experts right across the field, as well as being led by the 3 independent reviewers. It worked very closely with Defence in order to come to its conclusions. The job now for me as Defence Secretary in the Defence Department is to take that vision, which we've accepted, to take the recommendations, which we've accepted, and put that into practice. We're doing that already, and we have done in the first 6 months since the Strategic Defence Review in a number of areas. And we've got big decisions that we're in the process of taking, and we're working flat out to complete the DIP process, because that's the way that we implement, not just for this Parliament, but for the decade that they set out the vision for.
Right. Obviously, there seems to be some misunderstanding. We want to bring this to a conclusion.
Bring it to a close.
Thank you.
The reason why this is important is that in the previous Healey review in the late 60s, those programmes that entered an unaffordable defence plan came under immense pressure because of the ability of the government to separate them. The one that was most notable was the cancellation of the TSR2. The concern now is that GCAP, which will occupy the greater part of the programme, now doesn't have, we don't have adequate assurance or visibility of how that entered or exits the GCAP, the SDR. So can you provide us some assurance that that programme remains a valid and programme that we will see in the Defence Investment Plan?
I'm still working on GCAP. I'm absolutely determined that the momentum of the programme is maintained. I've been in communication with both the Italian and Japanese defence ministers within the last 24 hours. But to come to this, what I think is a really important point that you're making here, this investment plan, the plan for defence for this Parliament and this the next decade will be affordable, because it's been one of the fundamental flaws of the way that previous governments recently have done their defence planning, done their equipment plans, and this will be affordable. It will reflect the priorities and the strategy vision set out in the SDR. And I am determined, and I see it as my job, to make sure that when we make those commitments, when we make those decisions, they are deliverable, and that's what we do.
Yeah, Secretary, what I would suggest is the issue around reprioritisation, it's a key one in terms of terms of reference. Perhaps you could write to the committee to clarify so that we can clear any misunderstandings that there may be on this particular issue. I do want to move on from the Defence Investment Plan. I think there are three very quick supplementaries before I want to move on to defence reform. I've got Mike Martin, Ian Room and Emma Liu. Mike Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Secretary of State, I can see that you want to keep this big picture. So following in that theme, I noticed across the quads you've got 4 budget holders, and all of their spend is categorised. It's either invest, or it's readiness, or it's operate, and that seems like a very sensible innovation. Could you tell me the balance or percentages of how departmental spend is split between those 3 categories of invest, readiness and operate?
Between the Perm Secretary and I, we can give you a sort of feel for that. I don't know if this takes us into the reform territory, but you're quite right. I mean, part of the most important elements of the reform have meant we've got 4 budget holders instead of 10. We've got 1 investment budget.
Because I know we're short of time.
And if you look at the budget of the NAD Group, for instance, which holds that investment budget, we've actually created, as part of the reforms now, a FTSE 100 scale company just within that NAD Group.
Just what would the percentages be across those 3?
I'm very happy to share that with you. I think the invest budget is essentially very close to the CDEL budget, which this year is £23.2 billion of £62.2 billion. The readiness and run budget and the operations budget are very close to the Ardale budget, which is £38.9 billion. But let me get you a note on the precise.
I think that would be very good.
That's is the run readiness and the operate.
So they come together.
And the operate
okay.
come together. Is broadly the position.
And just super quickly,
that's all public information.
Is that going to be different in 12 months' time, 24 months' time, 5 years' time? Do we see that
well, we've not
shifting?
made. While we do have obviously a settlement for Seedale and Ardale, the splits within the budget are decisions that we will need to make in the usual way alongside the investment plan. We do have some of those publicly information on how our Seedale budget in particular is rising. We've alluded to some of the numbers. It is scheduled to rise to £31.5 billion by 2028-29.
So that shift is going to move from less investment, more operations.
More investment. Proportionally, Seedale is a greater proportion of the budget on the settlement that the department has.
Ian Rowe.
Secretary of State, could I ask regarding the MOD budget, have you announced any in-year savings? And if so, are you diverting money away from our people at the expense of big, shiny capabilities? I'm talking about medical services, especially because we all focus on programmes, Typhoon, GCAP, AUKUS, but I never hear anything said about the medical services within the armed forces. And from our experience on some of the inquiries I'm picking up, that actually we're not investing enough in the medical capabilities within our own armed forces. So could you just tell us what your plans are there?
The answer to your question, short answer, is no and no. The budget this year is bigger, £6 billion bigger than it was last year, so we're spending more. But of course, as you'd expect, as the public would expect, we're trying to make sure that we spend that well, that it reflects the priorities and rising pressures on defence at the moment. And where we can, we're giving the priority to the sort of operational demands and options that are being required of defence. That's increased commitment, preparing for what we hope will be a peace in Ukraine. It's potential options for stepping up action on shadow shipping. It is continuing, as you've seen in the
medical services in particular.
I'm going to ask General Naismith perhaps to add on. But in terms of no to savings. We're making decisions about controlling and managing our budgets, as you would expect us to do within the year, and no to prioritising shiny big platforms over the operations and the concerns to put the people, the men and women in uniform, at the heart of our defence plans.
Right, brilliant. Thank you. Oh, General, just very briefly on that.
I was just going to do General. Reinforcing fires in terms of under defence reform. I'm now the Armed Forces people person. I think I said that at the last time we met. And whilst we go through some of our managing the in-year budget, the Secretary of State holds us to account very strongly around protecting some of our people measures, as you might have described them, for which I'm very grateful as the Armed Forces people person.
Thank you very much. I've got Emma Liu very briefly, and then also very briefly Lincoln Job.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one from me, and it might seem a bit obvious, but since the government accepted all 62 of the recommendations in the SDR, and that included 12 new F-35As, the 12 SSN AUKUS nuclear subs, 6 munitions factories, 6 billion in munitions procurement, 7,000 long-range missiles, and 1 billion for homeland air defence. Will they all be in the defence investment plan or not?
They will be part of what we plan to deliver over the next decade, which is, of course, the period of the SDR.
So they'll be in the defence investment plan?
So they will be part of what we look to pursue over the next decade, because we want to implement those parts of the SDR.
Is the money there for all of those things, Secretary of State? Because that's a lot of costly items.
So when you look at the 270 billion we'll be spending in this Parliament, the fact we'll hit 3% in the next Parliament, that we've made a commitment like the other 31 allies as members of NATO to 3.5% on defence by 2035. This gives us that certain decade of rising defence spending, which I talked about to Ms Scroggum earlier on, and it allows us to plan within that for the way that we pace and prioritise the investments that we make.
I think what I'm trying to pin you down on, Secretary of State, and I know this, is that you accepted those recommendations, so are they going to happen? Are those what I've read, the list of things that I've just read out there, are they going to happen?
Well, they're not all going to happen in the first year. They can't all happen in the first year. But the SDR was a vision and essentially an outlined strategic plan for the next decade, and that's what we will pursue.
Brilliant. I do want to move on to defence reform with Mike Martin after this very quick supplementary from Lincoln Jopp.
Very quick one. General, whose job is it to protect the moral component of fighting power?
So it's the service chiefs through the chief, all of the service chiefs and Commander CSOC as part of the Chiefs Committee.
Thank you.
Brilliant. All right, on to defence reform then with Mike Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Secretary of State, what does success look like for defence reform? We're probably a year, 18 months into it now.
Well, first of all, it's a Parliament-long programme. I can tell you what progress looks like after 18 months. A Chief of the Defence Staff that now commands the service chiefs for the first time. A newly defined, powerful and appointed National Armaments Director for the first time in this country. A new military strategic headquarters that is up and running. A new leadership group, the Quad leaders, that is playing such an important part alongside ministers in the defence investment planning process. A NAD group with a £20 billion budget that's as big as a number of FTSE 100 companies. A reduced number of budget holders, which we touched on a moment ago. Instead of having 10 different budget holders making disparate defence investment decisions in different parts of defence, 4 budget holders corresponding with the Quad. And to give you an example of the way we're consolidating what was fragmentation and duplication, what loosely could be described as the different programmes and portfolios that were about stepping up our ability to be more lethal, weaponry systems, torpedoes, long range. Instead of having 27 of those, all pursued separately, that's consolidated in one.
What does the end of the process look like?
The end of
the defence reform.
You know, in a way, reform.
When you say you're done and it's achieved.
Reform never
done.
ends.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll bring General Naismith in and the Permanent Secretary in a moment, because they can talk about how what we do now and how we do it is different to 18 months ago, particularly General Naismith. But for me, the purpose of this is that we have a defence system that is better able, more quickly, to get the technology and equipment into the hands of our warfighters.
Can you give some specific examples?
Yes, and General Naismith can do
Yes,
that.
so perhaps if I can bring to life how it feels different today to how it felt about 12 months ago. From my perspective in the military strategic headquarters, it feels very different. As the Vice Chief, my role, I think, is very different to that of my predecessors. The Secretary of State has talked about the game changers, as I've referred to them, the Quad accountability, having a National Armaments Director and having the chain of command under the Chief of Defence Staff. But the thing that is making it work is having a military strategic headquarters. So whilst we have difficult conversations around the implementation of the SDR and the Defence Investment Plan, my responsibility in that headquarters is to carry on delivering stuff. I've referred to keeping the show on the road, keeping focused on delivery. The board that I run that we haven't had previously, I colloquially call the Getting Stuff Done board, because whilst all of this is happening, we need to keep delivering. Some of that has already been alluded to in terms of whether it's our housing strategy or industrial strategy or some of the contracts. From my perspective, if we hadn't reformed into a military strategic headquarters, we wouldn't have delivered on the SDR deliverables that we already have. So, for instance, the military, I know you've just been up to, or some of you have been up to RAF Witten, but the military intelligence services, the defence cyber, the counterintelligence unit, the defence cyber and EM force, we wouldn't have been able to corral around, this is different, we take an integrated force or pan-defence view, and we prioritise how we align resource with either warnings and indicators or priority threats. We didn't have a mechanism and we didn't have the authority to do that before. I mean, same in some of the people part of our organisation. I think it feels very different having an armed forces people person that sits on that board. We would have struggled to deliver things like the cyber direct entry. We would have struggled to deliver some of our foundation gap year piece.
That's the good. What's the bad? What frustrates you about the process? How would you tweak it, or what tweaks have you made as you've been rolling this out?
So we're building the team. I think that's my first thing. We want a very lean military strategic headquarters. What we don't need is a load more people adding more layers.
How many people in it?
Oh, I'd need to confirm. But in the central pillar part of it, it's less than 20 in terms of how we bring together what was already in existence through our military operations and commitments and what we did in our force development. I mean, those two pillars remain. It's the secret sauce was bringing those two things together so that we were able to have a prioritised view, what we do today, Armed Forces plan, and what we plan in the future. So we're building the muscle. We have an Armed Forces plan. This last year was the first time that we had a draft plan. For all the reasons we've talked about, it needs to be balanced with resource. As we enter into April, we look for that to be a more balanced Armed Forces plan and deliver against it. We have more to do about some of our performance and risk reporting. I could go on, but there's still a lot more to do, but it feels very different to how it did 12 months ago.
Thank you very much. Alex,
can I just add a couple of things, if you don't mind? So I took over as Principal Accounting Officer on the 1st of December. This is the 6th department I've worked in and the third I've run as Permanent Secretary. So I've seen a lot of government departments, and Defence has such an important but a complicated mission that it is delivering. I can really see the advantage only in the few weeks that I've been there of having those simpler, clear accountabilities that come from the heart of defence reform. All the changes that the Vice Chief has referred to, and having the Vice Chief and the Chief of the Defence Staff really pulling together the different services and that responsibility for resourcing, for tasking that comes with defence reform really does make a difference. This year is obviously a transitional year, which sort of partly relates to the sort of answers on your questions on the budgeting regime. But I would worry about defining end states to organisational change. Organisations continually need to change and evolve. It's wrong to say that reform concludes. At a certain point, we will need to make a decision when you mainstream the changes that you're making, but never ever assume that you can draw a line on delivering change, continually improving organisations, as complicated as MOD.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Alex Baker.
Thank you, Chair.
It's complicated.
Secretary of State, so since you've been in the job, have you actually had a formal briefing on the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, the NATO Communications and Information Agency, these NATO facilities, and how the UK could use them?
I haven't had a specific formal briefing on those, Ms Baker, but those have been part of some of the discussions that I've had when I've been up at NATO headquarters, and we've been meeting as defence ministers, particularly on the margins of some of those meetings.
I ask you about that because, you know, government is clear that we take a NATO first approach. The NAD has told us when he came to see us before Christmas that multilateral procurement, joint procurement is definitely part of the solution of how we move forward. We get all these services, these facilities through our NATO membership. We're paying for them already, yet from everything I can see, the UK does not use these facilities. Germany has just procured 8 Sea Guardian remotely pilot aircraft. They're getting all the tax benefits and cost benefits. Spain, Italy, these countries are all using these agencies, yet the UK are not engaged at all from what I can see. Given money is tight, can we really afford to be paying for a facility and then not using it, and instead replicating it through our own departments, replicating the services that we could use through NATO.
One of, quite rightly, the top priorities of Mark Rutte when he became Secretary General of NATO was a greater drive to see more joint commissioning and interoperable standards through NATO across our defence systems, something that I and we are really strongly behind. I will provide the committee, if you'll allow me, Mr. Chairman, a note with how far we're using those.
Thank you.
But where there are multilateral mechanisms like the OCCAR system, and we can use them, and they're appropriate, we do use them. But I'll just say the principle that we don't do some of the big things alone isn't just about using the multinational systems. If you look at the Lunar House Agreement, at the heart of it, the biggest ever British warship deal that we've struck with Norway, that isn't about us selling to Norway. That is about two nations jointly now commissioning our anti-submarine hunting frigates, the future upgrade of systems that we'll need, doing it together, because that allows us not just to have interoperable standards and equipment, it allows us effectively to have combined navies that will help keep the North Atlantic and High North safe in the future. So the combination and the principle that we do things with allies where we can and where it produces a better security or a better value for money is a really sound one, a really important one.
Great to hear. I just fear that we are not using these agencies because we generally think we know best, and that actually we just have had a tradition of not using them, so we continue to not use them. Would you commit to going and actually taking a fact-finding mission to look at those NATO facilities and whether we could use them going forward?
Well, let me first of all commit to providing you the chapter and verse in the areas you're interested in. Then take a view about whether you think we're using them effectively or sufficiently. I will do the same at that point.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lincoln Job.
Cabinet Secretary, hopefully a very quick one. I think it was about November 2024 we had one of these sessions with the Secretary of State and your predecessor, and at that the then Permanent Secretary said that he would reduce the number of full-time equivalent civil servants in the Ministry of Defence by 10% over the course of this Parliament. I've reconfirmed that that was indeed the Secretary of State's aim in the Chamber of the House of Commons subsequently. Just seek reassurance that that is indeed still your aim.
So it is a part of the SDR efficiency programme. The commitment is to reduce between 2026-27 to 2029-2030, just to be precise. Reduction in civil service workforce costs of 10% is the aim that we set out in the SDR. The reassurance I would give you and give the committee is that the numbers are declining, and the latest information I have is we were just a little bit over 55,000 full-time equivalent civil servants at the start of December last year, 2025. I mean, I would note, though, this is best done as part of a sort of a serious efficiency programme, which is the thing that we need to put in place. Civil servants provide incredibly valuable work, and something that I have heard clearly from military colleagues is, at times, there can be benefit in civil servants taking on roles that the military have done historically, and that ultimately that can be a better way of creating a sort of integrated force, and the Vice Chief may want to talk about this. So we need to approach this carefully in a way that optimises value for money, make sure that we can provide the support we need. That in particular, the National Armaments Director has a group that has the scale and the expertise that it needs in order to ensure that we can deliver the equipment that our military need.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, on to Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Chair. Can we just go back to the SDO, and why has the MOD not agreed with the committee's recommendation that we should produce a publicly available annual report on the progress of the SDO implementation?
Because we have an annual cycle of reporting in full the work of the department. The SDR is not a subset of that. The SDR is essentially the framework and the vision within which Defence will now make its decisions, set its priorities, and deliver the programmes and the aims that it set out. So it fundamentally sets the it fundamentally sort of sets the direction for the department itself, Mr. Twigg, rather than being this is something that you can separate off and report on and pursue separately from the work of the department.
So other than the Defence Investment Plan, has the department implemented all the SDL commitments due to be completed by the end of 2025?
We've largely done that, and I can provide for the committee a sort of running log of where the SDR report attached timelines, target timelines. We've been hitting those, and I can give the committee a sort of rundown on those.
Not sort of play on words.
Which one do you want to ask me?
The word you said largely, so that suggests that some haven't, or some parts of it haven't. So could you enlighten us on that?
Yep.
Because otherwise you could have said yes in full, but you didn't.
Okay, so there is a recommendation with a very exacting timetable over reworking and revamping certain elements of military training, and we're off the pace on that.
Yeah.
But to my knowledge and recognition, we've been determined to act where we can, to make decisions where we need to, and to implement the SDR, including the recommendations where they have early timescales. And in some cases, we've exceeded what they've set out. And so I think if it's helpful to the committee, I can give you a sort of, if you like,
it'd be useful to know.
A six-month audit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure whether you're going to say, well, I can't tell you what the problems are with training because it would give away some sort of secret, but I just wonder what specifically the obstacles are there. To
refer to the military head of training.
Yeah, so I was going to use that as an example. There's two in my mind that I know that we haven't delivered against, that we said we would do by the end of 2025. The particular one around our training review, if I'm perfectly honest, it was being very clear about defining what the question was and then how we proceeded with that across our reformed areas, because as you will recognise...
Sorry to interrupt, did you define what the question was?
Yes, yeah, so what's the scope? What's the scope of the recommendation? So what's the good that we're going to get out of it? So that was part of it. Part of it also, in all honesty, was making sure that we were clear who in the reformed world was leading that work, because as you'll recognise, some of that is very much connected to a Department of State business, some of it was connected to a military strategic headquarters, so we are slightly behind the curve in defining that one.
And Professor Malcolm Chalmers' involvement in the SDR and the Defence Investment Plan, is he heavily involved? Because he was brought in as a obviously exceptionally experienced and knowledgeable person. What's his involvement been? Yeah,
look, he is an exceptional person with exceptional experience, as you say, Mr. Twigg, in the SDR. He played a major role in chairing one of the review and challenge streams of work. Since we've been fortunate enough to bring him into the department as a strategic advisor and head of SONAC in Old Money, he's playing a part in the big strategic decisions and debates we're having within the department. He's advising me, and he's contributing to the defence investment planning process.
Mm-hmm. So what's he brought to the table in terms of anything additional the department didn't have already?
I can let the two representatives of the department offer you a view on that. For my money, he's bringing what he and a number of others, but he in particular did bring in the strategic defence review process, a deep expertise and a degree of external challenge that we've been able to bring
I'm trying to find
inside.
Out what he's actually added. You know, what's changed as a result of his involvement. What is different and better?
For me, it adds to the blend of different perspectives and advice that, as Secretary of State, I'm able to draw on.
Okay. Can I just ask you, before I finish, you will notice that Civitas has published today an understanding of the UK's transition to war-fighting readiness. And one of the key, which I've called for Sir Bernard Jenkin and Chris Donnelly, one of the key, there's a number of key issues, I think. One is how we need, and if we go back to the CDS's comments, that we're not ready enough yet to deal with an all-out war, basically. So I just wondered, what's your take on where we are, not just in defence terms, but a whole society, government approach to moving to a war footing and dealing with the current challenges today? Where do you think we are at this point in time?
First of all, I would always argue, and I had total confidence, if we had to commit our troops to fight tonight, they would do so. The observations in the SDR, reinforced, if I may say so, by a good report that you, Bernard Jenkin and Chris Donnelly, have all of them published today, reinforces that recognition that in a period where threats are rising, demands on defence are rising, then the level of warfighting readiness, which was at the heart of the SDR, needs to be increased. On the question that the SDR set out, which is a recognition that we learn from Ukraine, or if you like, are reminded from Ukraine that when a country is seriously under threat or forced to fight, it isn't just its forces, it's the industry, it's the innovation, and it's society behind it. That requires some of the responses that you will see in the Armed Forces Bill that had its second reading yesterday in the House of Commons, with the change outlined and indicated in the SDR to the way that we approach and develop our reservists forces.
You're focusing on defence alone, which we know, but it's not about just defence, it's about the whole society, government approach, going down to the finance sector, going right across through industry and also. So I just wonder, trying to get your take on where you think we are. Are we some way off yet and lots more work needs to be done, or do you think real progress is being made?
Some progress is made. Yeah. There is really lots still to be done, and you're quite right to say this is whole of government. It has to be driven from the centre. My concern is to make sure that where defence can make the most telling and important contributions, we get on and do that. So we're doing that on reservists, we're doing that on new ways of bringing people into the forces, like with our cyber direct entry. We're doing that by stepping up the work we're doing, including legislative changes on drone threats or threats to undersea critical infrastructure, and we're doing that with some of the action we want to take on shallow shipping as well.
Right, brilliant. I want to Jesse Norman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to draw the committee's attention to my register of interests. We're some way in, Secretary of State. I'd be grateful if you and the team could be relatively clipped, if you can, because there's a certain amount to get through. You've spoken about defence spending, £6 billion here. I think you said 270 billion over the life of the Parliament. One of the problems of talking about defence spending in percentage terms of GDP is that when GDP is barely growing, it doesn't really help. Would it not be a much better system just to identify specific numbers that government is committing to over the length of a spending review, so that everyone can work to those numbers on the CDEL and RDEL side, and you know exactly where you are, and therefore it becomes a plannable, manageable process rather than just juggling around within percentages of GDP?
Well, Mr. Norman, we do both. But you'll know that if you like, the currency, the yardstick in particular for NATO members, is a percentage of GDP commitment. You'll know also, because of certainly the last 15 years, where economic growth has been very sluggish, that has a disadvantage if you're interested in and concerned about the quantum. It's why that I've stressed to this committee not just that we have made the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, or that we're hitting, as the Prime Minister announced a year ago, 2.5% of GDP 3 years earlier than your party was proposing and anyone expected us. But in this year alone, there's an extra 6 billion in the defence budget. So it's just over it's over 60 billion, and in this Parliament alone, it'll be 270 billion that we'll be spending on defence, and we'll hit 3% in the next.
I was asking about a technical matter, and you've made it a slightly party political response, which is a pity, I think, for the committee. Let's just talk a little bit about what the Prime Minister said. In a speech last year, he said that he wanted to see security and defence as a central organising principle of government, the first thought in the morning and the last at night. And so there is a sense that, and he's explicitly calling for, and you have done, and the SDR has done, a national conversation about security and defence. So the question is, how much of a priority is that national conversation for you, for the government?
Look, in many ways, you could define what a national conversation might be about defence in many ways. And actually, the very challenges we've seen the Prime Minister and the government dealing with over the last fortnight are part of that. It's one of the reasons that we've seen in recent public opinion surveys, defence now rising to be the third most issue of concern alongside the NHS in the country. The question for me as Defence Secretary is how we help people recognise the nature of the changing world, the era of new threat, the imperative for greater vigilance and resilience in this country, but also how we demonstrate that when we're willing as a nation to invest more in defence as we must, then that is making us more secure and safer, but is also bringing direct benefits to areas and jobs and young people that they see, which is why the defence role in helping drive economic growth is also so important.
But who is responsible for leading that national conversation?
I think a little bit as Mr. Twigg was asking about, if you're having a national conversation and you've got a whole of society, nature of the challenges and threats that we face, which is undoubtedly the case when you look at cyber or you look at the concern about critical national infrastructure and underseas, then that's got to be an effort that's led by government as a whole from the centre.
No, which individual? Is that the Prime Minister?
Well, that'll be for the it'll be for the Prime Minister with his cabinet, and it'll be for the National Security Secretariat and the National Security Advisor.
Okay, you've said it's amorphous as to what a national conversation means. It's a term that was introduced into the SDR, and government's been talking about it. Prime Minister's spoken about a national effort. How many speeches has the Prime Minister given on the national conversation and the need to broadcast the importance of defence and security to the nation? I'm
afraid you'll have to ask number 10 for a record of those. I don't keep count of the number of speeches the Prime Minister makes. And
okay, I think the answer is.
I think he probably gives half a dozen a day.
I suspect the answer is 0 on this. How many public engagement events have been held either to your awareness out of either MOD or number 10 or the Cabinet Office? I mean, in other words, you've talked about the importance of a national conversation, and it's proper to ask what's being done about it. So how many public engagement events have you held? Okay, how many public
I'm pausing only because you draw the parameters so wide, it's quite difficult to know how to answer. I'm perfectly prepared to
okay, have you made a lot of speeches, Secretary of State? Have you made a lot of speeches up and down the country saying it's a national problem here, we need to be thinking of this in the Prime Minister's words, first thought in the morning, last at night, we need people to understand we're potentially in a pre-war situation? Have you given those speeches, and how many have you given? How much engagement has there been?
In a way, the thinking of the SDR, that sort of concern, the Prime Minister's quite absolutely accurate description about how defence is now central to the thinking and the duty of this government. It imbues almost everything I say, everywhere I go, on every occasion.
Right, but I'm talking about the levels of communication, what you're doing to raise. Do you, for example, publish threat assessments so that people can see in the public how the threat from China and Russia is increasing in line with the concerns that the Prime Minister has articulated?
So the government has risk registers, it has threat assessments, it publishes what it can of that as a regular element. This House plays a part in that. This committee plays a part in it. The Intelligence Security Committee plays a part in exactly that sort of national conversation and that awareness building of what we're facing.
You don't think it's astonishing how little has been done when you consider that you've just raised the reservist age from 55 to 65, haven't seen any major discussion of the rationale for that or embedding it in the national conversation. Let's ask another question. Prime Minister
With respect, that was discussed yesterday in the House of Commons when we had the second
I'm
reading
talking
of the
about
Armed
government
Forces
getting
bill.
out there to the people of this country,
set out in the explanatory
getting
notes
out to the
the
people
bill,
of this country and saying,
and we'd welcome your
and
contribution
saying, and
to that debate as the bill goes
this
through
is
Parliament.
No, I don't think it's a parliamentary matter. It's a matter of government discharging the Prime Minister's obligation to think about this first thing in the morning and last at night as a national effort, which is what he's said. So here's a question. This is supposed to be cross-departmental, so it might include Department of Health, Innovation, Technology, Business and Trade. So which departments have been formally tasked with working on the national conversation alongside the Ministry of Defence?
That is government work in progress.
Okay, and has any policy or spending commitment been changed as a result of this interdepartmental government working that you've called for and he's called for?
There's certainly been commitments that we've made in defence that reflect exactly that.
No, but in other departments, we're talking about innovation and science. And
so I can answer for the
technology.
Defence Department as Defence Secretary. I can try and get you answers from other departments. I'm not here and I can't, I'm afraid, answer for what other government departments have done.
No, but you're in charge of the National Defence Strategy with number 10. They've talked about a national conversation. It's interdepartmental. These departments are working to you to establish the outlines of this national defence strategy. I'm asking you what's been done. You're not able to answer. I'd be grateful if you would write to the committee, but I do think it's telling that not only has nothing been said publicly in any great scale about raising public awareness of this vital issue, but very little has been done, it appears, within government to ensure that departments are properly aligned. Let me ask a final question. How long are we going to have to wait before we can judge whether this initiative of a national conversation has succeeded or failed?
It's a good question. Rather like reform, I don't see there's a point of success or failure. I don't see a point of completion, particularly as we know that the threats and the challenges that we're facing are evolving in the whole time. You're quite right to challenge me and challenge the government on this important area. It'll be an area that we hope we can achieve cross-party consensus because it requires a whole of government and a whole of politics effort to this. But I don't think there'll be a point. I really genuinely don't see a point where it's done and it can be declared a success or failure.
Maybe I can assist you in that. I think the Strategic Defence Review said it was 2 years. Okay, fair enough.
But I mean, the serious point here is the fundamental point is that if a country is stepping up to the challenge that Mr. Norman is quite rightly outlining here, that is a challenge that's defined by the threats we face, the security environment. That doesn't stop changing or evolving or reach a point where it's done, whether or not the SDR may have said or suggested 2 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was in recommendation 26 that where it said it would be completed within 2 years as part of the process. But anyway, let's move on swiftly, given the lack of time, to Lincoln Job.
Secretary, you're a busy man, so you may not have had the opportunity to see your two predecessors and the former Minister for the Armed Forces giving evidence a week ago today.
I didn't, no.
Okay. In summary, particularly for Ben Wallace and James Healey outlined the following thesis. From the mid-90s onwards, governments of both parties took a capability holiday when it came. They hollowed out defence. And what enabled them to do so was the fact that the perception of the threat is run by the information flow that comes out of the Ministry of Defence, and the perception of our readiness to meet it is a result of the information flow that does or doesn't come out of defence. And Mr. Healey in particular was very concerned that so many things that came across his desk which said, we're really not ready to meet this threat. Also had stamped all over them, this is far too sensitive for you to talk about in public. And so, as a result of this conspiracy of optimism, successive governments have chosen, in effect, butter over guns, while the Russians were choosing guns. And therefore, we have a massive mismatch of threat. And Mr. Healey said that he worked with the Permanent Secretary. He was deeply uneasy about this, and he said he worked with the Permanent Secretary because he said, what happened in the Cold War? Because you know, the perception here is that you're not being very frank with us over the last 18 months about our inability to meet the threat as it currently exists and will evolve. And he said during the Cold War that what would happen is that a pretty warts and all report would go to the Defence Select Committee. They would make their reports and redact the sensitive information. And this was at the most freezing times of the Cold War in the 70s and 80s. And both Sir Ben and James said, look, the machine sitting on your left is absolutely institutionally way too cautious. They won't play the role that you need them to in order to start this national conversation, which means that you can actually convince people that yes, education is important, yes, health is important, but defence is incredibly important and may mean that we need to start choosing some guns rather than some butter. Would you like to react to that thesis?
Well, you're encouraging me to read their evidence, first of all. But I think part of my mission before the election, at the election and since, has been, as Defence Secretary, to draw attention to the threats we face, to argue that this is a new era for defence, that steps need to be taken, and the government has demonstrated a seriousness for that by making this big commitment, not just to boosting defence budgets this year, in the first year, but making the commitment to raising defence spending. Now, as politicians, from whatever party, we know that's unsustainable unless you can take the public with it. And I think that there is a public recognition that this is required. There is a recognition that hard power is required alongside good alliances. And that's characterised the approach that we've tried to take as a new government over the last 18 months. But I agree with you're kind of doing your side of the bargain, but I don't think anyone else, and it comes back to Mr. Norman's earlier question, I don't think anyone else across government thinks that they need to put down arrows in their budgets in order to make them safer. I'm sorry, that's exactly what the Foreign Secretary did when we made the decision that we would switch next year 0.2% of GDP out of direct overseas aid into defence. That was a decision that the government took, very clearly a down arrow in a different path. If you look at the decisions the Chancellor made in her last budget, there was a squeeze on the spending in this spending review period of all departments with the exception of defence and the NHS. That's a government saying we're putting the sort of priority that this committee would argue needs to be put on defence, and we're doing that over and above the needs of other departments. Now, I can't account for the way that James Healey and Ben Wallace may have washed their hands of any sort of responsibility for what happened in their period in government. What I would say is your description of their characterisation of how we're approaching and how seriously we're approaching this in defence does not correspond, I think, with the leadership we now have in defence, with the decisions we're taking, and the challenges that we can see that we must meet.
I mean, I won't go into, inability to take stuff out of welfare and all that, because that would be too political. But I really do recommend. It might save yourself some angst in year 3 of being Secretary of State for Defence if you go and have a watch of their evidence.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm sure the Secretary of State has listened to that suggestion. Let's move on to now defence finance with Alex Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary of State, let's talk about defence finance. Can you talk to me about what you think are the main problems for industry with defence finance, particularly when it comes to banks' ability to lend money to defence?
So I think we're moving and it's part of it's partly a recognition in the investor community, the banks, of the discussions we've just been having in the last half an hour, that actually there is a national and an allied challenge with defence and security, that isn't just a matter for the armed forces and defence, but we're moving away from a period where investment in defence and security for this nation and the people in this nation is seen as not an unethical but an ethical investment, an investment that isn't just about the interests of the defence industry but of the nation. Because quite honestly, and this is the argument I've made when I've spent as much time with investors as I have with industry in the 18 months of being Defence Secretary, because frankly you don't have economic stability without national security, and you don't have a stable society without national security either. So if you're I think we're moving through that period. My interest now is not just what commitments do we need to make with public taxpayers' money in defence investment, but what leverage can we get from sources of private finance to put alongside that. And so we will be driving a harder deal with defence companies when they get contracts with defence. We are looking to new sources of venture capital to invest in the potential of Britain's defence tech base. We've changed the arrangements in government so that we have now a new Defence Exports Office consolidating all the government's efforts behind defence exports. So we're winning new export deals for Britain, which pumps billions potentially into the British economy and to our defence industry.
But still there is a problem because our banks cannot lend easily to industry, and that means that our industry cannot build the capacity that we need to actually build stuff, because they cannot get access to the cash because there's a load of international regulations making it absolutely impossible for banks to lend. Now, our banks do get around this, and I do recognise, that actually progress has been made, but fundamentally there is an issue because money is not moving in the way it needs to.
So look, I absolutely applaud the work that you personally are doing on this territory, the way that you're championing fresh ideas like the Defence Security and Resilience Bank. One of the things that I know you will have noted, and Mr. Chairman, you'll see the results of before too long, is we've set up a defence finance investment group, something Defence has not had before, and this is a way of trying to tap into the understanding where there are barriers, such as you cite, and better understanding where there are opportunities for private sources of investment, and what government and the way that we go about making our investment decisions, the way that we need to change to take maximum advantage of those.
Having attended that group, I'm really impressed at the engagement that we're getting. Historically, there are those barriers, but we need to work through the proactive, positive engagement getting from the banks, sources of finance, looking to find solutions to some of those historic barriers that you've identified.
The challenge that I've got is I keep raising this with government, and what government keep coming back to is that there's a whole myriad of options out there, that it is going to take some credit guarantees, some sovereign-backed credit guarantees. That is the only thing that is going to actually get money moving. Yet, when I speak to different government departments, I'm just not convinced there is actual understanding of this issue. What do you think?
I think there is an understanding. I think that understanding is growing. And I think the recognition of its importance, is underlined by this advisory group we set up. I think it's underlined by the fact that the Chancellor and I are working very closely on this and have been over the last 18 months. We work with the CBI specialist group and a task force that reported to us jointly. And we're moving into an era which moves away from the way that the British government and the Defence Department has traditionally looked at only what it is that government is putting into contracts and its relations with industry, to the wider potential that we've got to build, and we will.
If we don't fix this issue, do you accept that actually all we're going to do is to drive inflation? We're going to buy the same amount of kit, it's just going to cost more.
Look, that is a really big risk, and of course, if we don't do our procurement better and in different ways, if we don't leverage the investments that I believe potentially are there, and that includes foreign direct investment into the defence industry in this country, which hit record levels last year at £1.54 billion. These are all big opportunities for our investors as well as our industry in the period ahead.
Thank you very much. Right, let's move on to Ian Room.
Thank you. Obviously, the committee heard from the previous ministers around the interaction between the secrecy within the MOD and the unwillingness to let Parliament know some of the surroundings. In fact, James Eapie said that we should disclose more to the committee on the basis that the MOD sometimes turn around and say that it gave away classified information. And he went on to say, I would argue that there were two things. First, if the armed forces are not as ready as they should be, Parliament should know that, because from that comes Parliament pressure on the Treasury to increase the defence budget. Second, if the armed forces are as ready as they should be, there is a deterrent effect to Parliament publishing data and information to that effect, so our adversaries know. One good thing that you did, which I will say was a good thing, and we should do more of it, you made public the threat from the Yantar, the Russian shadow fleet, and gave that operation, and the public were aware of that threat and the seriousness of the threats that we are facing. Should we be doing more of that? Should you be doing more of that?
I will call out the Putin threats to us when I think those are needed. I think it is part of priming the national conversation that we've discussed before. It's part of treating the public properly, making sure that they're aware of some of the threats that we face. Should we do more in disclosing to Parliament? I'm trying to ensure that we are able to give the committee the sort of briefing and information that you need to do your job. Should we do more on shadow shipping? Yes, we should. And I've now identified further military options that we can use to target shadow shipping. I'm discussing these with Cabinet colleagues. The UK will host a meeting shortly of Jeff Nations, the military legal experts, that allow us to look at the legal basis on which we can act against shadow shipping and sanctioned ships, and the military options that we might use. And this is part of actively stepping up the action on shadow shipping that you've seen us do with allies in recent weeks. And it is part of making sure that Putin is not so easily able to fund his war machine in Ukraine through the sale of sanctioned oil. And frankly, I'd want to see any oil revenue that could be raised from seized sanctioned ships recycled and put into Ukraine in order to fight Putin's invasion. And we've had a strong record on sanctions. We've had a strong record on sanctioning vessels, both under the previous government and this. We've sanctioned a total of 544 ships, around 250 in the last year alone. And we've seen with allies the way that we can take a couple of hundred of those off the seas. We've seen the way that Russian oil revenues have been cut by a quarter in the last year. So it's clear that we can do this, and if we step it up further, we put pressure on Putin, and we help. I think that position of strength that Ukraine needs and pressure on Putin to come to the negotiating table and settle this with a proper peace deal.
Do you think the term of the all-society approach of bringing the public along with us on defence, by doing more of that, the public will understand that we need to spend more money on defence, and it allows parliamentarians to put more pressure on the Treasury to assist in the role of getting that extra funding for those capabilities that are needed? So my question is, can we talk more about some of these operations and not hide behind it's operational, it's classified, and a particular example was the Yantar that I thought of, because that really got the public talking about the threat that we faced from Russia, particularly.
I take that point, and I'm glad you see it had that impact, Mr. Room. I thought it was an important signal to Putin, as well as information that the public deserved. And the answer is yes, we should do that, and I will do that when it's important to call it out. I'll do that because I want the public to be as well informed as possible. That conversation is not just for me as Defence Minister, it's for all parliamentarians and others that care about the national security and defence of this country. But I'm also not interested in the way that perhaps previous ministers that you heard from used to use the public, the media, to try and put pressure on the Treasury. I have a really good, close working relationship with the Chancellor. You've seen us working together on defence driving growth. You've seen us together making announcements about increasing defence spending. And I've been in cabinets and shadow cabinets before now. There has to be private space where public policy and public decisions are taken. And for my money, the way that government properly settles these things is within government. And that's the way I've been conducting the way that Defence and the Treasury work in an unprecedentedly close way together.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Secretary, just to build on what Ian Room and Lincoln Jopp have just intimated, when giving evidence to our committee, former Defence Minister James Heape actually said that the institution, namely the Ministry of Defence, was actually stopping him from providing information and transparency for parliamentary scrutiny, including to the Defence Committee. Now, are you able to actually implement your priorities, or are you being held back by the institution or the deep state from doing that?
Yes, I'm able to implement my priorities. I have a lot of confidence in the leadership we now have in place in defence. No, I'm not being prevented from doing that, and I'm not sure I recognise the description of some deeply resistant, hostile deep state.
You will be able to provide parliamentary...
working against the interests of democratically elected members of this House or of government.
Brilliant. So you will be looking to become even more transparent, in particular with the Defence Committee.
You've had my commitment at the outset for that. And you've seen the way that I've responded when you've asked for briefings, when you've asked for information, and I will continue to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Right, let's move on to Emily.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just wanting to move on to Ukraine and the coalition of the willing. Secretary of State, do you have a strategy for parliamentary engagement in advance of a vote on the coalition of the willing? Because as you'll know from your statement in the House, there's multiple unanswered questions regarding the actual detail of the UK's commitment. But also, is there any possibility that deployment of troops could happen in advance of a parliamentary vote?
Two things, if I may. The very detailed military planning that the UK and France have led, with over 200 military planners and conversations. The latest coalition of the willing had 39 nations involved. Means that if there is a peace deal, we'll be ready from day one to move to help secure that peace in Ukraine. And you had the Prime Minister confirm with President Zelensky and President Macron that we're ready to deploy UK forces into Ukraine if the circumstances of the peace deal allow us to do that. And it is the circumstances and detail of the peace deal that will largely define the specifics of the commitments that we make. So in a way, it's at that point rather than now, and now would be premature to be able to have that sort of discussion. Secondly, I would just point to the commitment that the Prime Minister made, which is a recognition that if in the circumstances of a peace deal the UK will commit troops and forces into Ukraine, that he recognises that the House will want and will have a debate and a vote on that decision before those troops go in.
But if things are fast moving, say it's recess, or that's just not possible, there is every likelihood that troops could be deployed without a vote in Parliament under royal prerogative, isn't there?
No, I'm not getting into those sort of hypotheticals. That's going to be a challenge for us as government to uphold the commitment the Prime Minister has made, and a challenge for Parliament to make sure that we can do that.
If that does happen, would you commit to coming back afterwards, as soon as possible, to give the details?
No, our commitment is to do what the Prime Minister said, to ensure that and recognise that this House will want to debate it and should vote on it before the commitment of forces is made.
Okay. Why do you think, out of the coalition of the willing, why do you think other members haven't gave the same commitment that UK and France have given?
Because our two nations have set out to lead the coalition of the willing. The commitments that other nations have made are commitments that they've made, and collectively we're not publicising or releasing details, because quite honestly that would only make Putin wiser.
So sorry Secretary of State, I'm just checking, so have other countries made commitments that are just not public, and it's only the UK and the France's commitment that's been made public, and the States?
So there are 39 nations involved in the discussions
so
and conversations of the coalition
made?
of the willing. The majority of those nations have made commitments as part of the military plans in the event of a peace deal that we would be able together to ensure the safe skies, the safe seas, and the regeneration force that will help Ukraine rebuild to the point that it must and it will be the best deterrent and defence against any future Russian aggression. And as previously stated to the House, we've got a number of UK personnel in Ukraine. They're providing support to the embassy, they're providing support to Ukraine for their defence against Russia's illegal invasion. And this has been the case since we reopened the defence section in the embassy in April 22, and since the election that number has grown as we continue to step up UK support at Ukraine's request.
I'll leave it there, Chair, in interest of time.
Thank you very much, most kindly, because of the lack of time. Right, let's move on to Michelle Scroggum.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary, you announced last year that there'd been a 30% increase in Russian activity in UK waters. Can you tell us how much of that increase was subsea?
That was a headline. Figure. I think I gave about a 30% increase in Russian vessels intruding and active in wider UK waters. I think it's. You wouldn't expect me to be public to give a detailed breakdown of those. If the General's got anything she wants to add on the military front of that, the main point is not just that the level of Russian attacks in Ukraine is increasing, but the levels of Russian aggression and activity, incursions into NATO airspace, menacing critical infrastructure, shadow shipping and malign Russian maritime activity has all been increasing.
Obviously, if you don't want to go into details on what level with subsea, but what threats do you see that posing to UK?
Do you want to?
So I think it would perhaps be inappropriate to try and delineate proportions, but suffice to say that we recognise the uptick in the threat, and therefore the need for us to do more about it in the high north, either at surface or subsurface. I think you have heard some of the First Sea Lord and what he's talked about in terms of how he is responding to drive transformation in the Navy to be able to respond to that uptick in threat and to be able to do it more quickly than we perhaps were planning to do before. And that's around the Atlantic Bastion, which is a whole host of things that are different capabilities that would contribute to meeting that uptick in threat.
Are we seeing threats from other adversaries, for example, for China in those areas too?
So I wonder if we should come back and answer some of the questions rather than answering them here. I don't have the detail of the questions, the answers to your questions, but we perhaps just need to make sure that it's appropriate that we share that detail.
The short answer is yes. You know, if you look at cyber, for defence in the last year alone, we've had 90,000 separate cyber attacks. Large majority of those are linked to states and state activity, or state-linked activity. The nature of some of those cyber attacks may be different depending on the sort of states that are behind them. Russia, China, Iran are all linked to some of those attacks. If you look at the recent debate whether we started this afternoon, Mr. Chairman, with concern about Greenland, the Arctic security and the High North, that is about rising levels of Russian activity and aggression in that area, but also rising levels of interest, Chinese interest, because as climate change opens up that northern sea route, it opens up the link that, and we've seen, of course, as well, the link up to more closely through the war in Ukraine of Russia with certain allies working more closely together.
Coming back to what some of my colleagues were raising about public awareness and defence spending, this is something that I've raised on a fairly frequent basis, and the fact that I don't believe the public are as aware as they should be of just how high the threats are and how many attacks are being made on the UK on a regular basis. When you talk about the cyber attacks and everything, people might see that Marks and Spencer's was attacked and it's inconvenient for their shopping not being delivered. But the understanding that that is a direct attack on our supply chains, I don't think is being put across quite as strongly as we could. And I understand the need that we don't really want to alarm people. But when we talk about whole of society resilience and defence, surely that's something that we should be doing more work on to ensure that people understand exactly what the threats are, where we are, and that we are already being attacked in the grey zone. It might not trigger an Article 5, but these events are occurring, and I don't think the public are as aware as they should be. Would you?
I see that as a fair, sound point and argument to make.
So I tend to agree that we need to have a different national conversation and understanding some of our threats without scaring the nation is an important part of that conversation, particularly around some of our cyber threats. Of course, it is a balance of how we attribute some of what we see from a defence perspective, but I think it's a very fair challenge about raising awareness so that we have a better understanding and a better national conversation.
Thank you. Can I ask you, you've mentioned Atlantic Bastion. They were due to be contracts and deployments this year. Has that been pushed back with the Defence Investment Plan not being published?
So I don't believe it has. Like I said, so my job is making sure that we still get stuff done whilst we are continuing to do some of the broader investment planning.
They're on track with where they should be.
Yes, and you will see, undoubtedly, because it was a strong feature of the SDR, you'll see in the defence investment planning that that transformation to more autonomy, the creation of an Atlantic Bastion that is a combination of the sort of traditional hard power ships with the new technology of surface and undersea autonomy accelerated, and that will be part of not just rapidly reinforcing and raising our levels of warfighting readiness, but it will also be part of putting our British military at the most innovating edge of NATO nations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a very quick supplementary from Fred Thomas.
Thank you. Secretary of State, lots of discussion about the country's awareness or lack of the threat. Around the cabinet table, your cabinet colleagues, what's your sense of their understanding and awareness of the threat this country's under?
Their awareness is good. Discussions and briefings that the Prime Minister and I and Foreign Secretary provide for the Cabinet help ensure that. Their acceptance that we must do more is very strong. And I have to say, having served in Cabinet and shadow cabinets before, the unity of purpose of this Cabinet is second to none.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And on to Lincoln Job.
Thank you, Chair. In the answer to the Chair, I think you said, I don't recognise the characterisation of some sort of security deep state which is attempting to keep secrets from Parliament. And so, with my irony klaxon still ringing in my ears, can we talk about the super injunction that was put in place by the prior government and maintained, which stopped us knowing about the Afghan data breach and anyone else? And one specific question. So when Sir Grant Shapps came and gave evidence last week, he said that he thought that by about the autumn 2024, it would have run its natural course, the super injunction. And he did so on the basis of two lines of argument. The first was that the longer that the data was out there, the more likely it was that those who were put at risk by that fact were either got out or got, essentially. He equally said that every time they went back to renew the super injunction, that the judge would increase the demand for the numbers of people that were having to be shipped back here. And so in some sort of, quite political combination of those two factors, he thought that by the autumn, I think was the phrase he used, 2024, that it would have run its course. And claimed surprise that it was kept going by the government for a whole year. So very specific question. In the times that you renewed the super injunction up to the point when you made it public, was the court demanding that you take ever more and more Afghans at each turn of that handle?
Was this the same Grant Shapps that renewed the super injunction in May just before the start of the general election?
That would be the same.
The answer to your direct question is no. But at the point where that was, the renewal was required, I and government was working on a fresh assessment, which hadn't been done, that allowed us to take a view of the time period, the extremely heavy-handed nature and of having a super injunction in place in the first place, allowed us to take a fresh view of the apparent risk to those whose data might be on that data set, and it was that report that this committee will, if it's not already heard from, will take evidence from, and it was on that basis that I was able to ensure that we could change government policy, we could change the argument to the court, and that we could get to the point where we should get to, which that super injunction was removed, and we could take the other action that was required in order to deal with the flow of Arab applicants.
There was just one other sort of legacy piece of that discussion that we had with the former Secretaries of State, and that was that Ben Wallace said after a prior data breach, he had put in train a number of measures which were not followed up on. And when we asked him, well, why did no one do it? And he said, quote, someone didn't do their job. So I just offer it that perhaps you might be reassured to check on what he thought he did put in train, and that job has now subsequently been done.
I mean, this committee has its own inquiry into this area, and as part of the evidence, if it's helpful, I can outline for this committee the steps that I took, having become Defence Secretary, concerned about a pattern of data lapses and data breaches in this area, the steps that I took to make sure that those systems were tightened up.
That would be incredibly
and I'm sure that will be part of the perspective and the evidence that you'll look for as part of your inquiry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that has been an absolutely fascinating evidence session. I am very, very grateful to your good self, Secretary of State, also to the Permanent Secretary and to the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff for your invaluable time. And I know that that will have helped to inform not just parliamentary scrutiny, but also to enlighten the wider British public about some of the threats that we face and what the government is doing to keep us safe and secure. And with that, I bring the session to a close. Order, order.